Have you ever stood in the eye of a storm? Not the kind that lashes against your windows, but the kind that rips through your heart, leaving only silence where love once was? I was 9 the day my parents left me. They said they'd be back soon. I watched their car disappear down that lonely road, believing every word. But they never returned. I waited by the window until the sun set, until the cold crept into my bones, until my sobs faded into whispers. Each night, I called their names into the dark, hoping, praying they would hear me. But the only answer was the hollow echo of my own voice. That was the day I learned. Sometimes, the people who give you life are the ones most capable of destroying it. But this is not just a story about abandonment. It is a story about what came after. The woman who found me, saved me, and taught me that family is not defined by blood, but by those who choose to stay. My name is Emma, and this is the day I discovered that love can bloom in the ruins of betrayal. Welcome to AGS Stories. If my story touches something in you, if you've ever felt the sting of being left behind, subscribe to this channel. Join me, because together we are stronger. I'll be forever grateful. I was 9 years old the day my parents drove me to the edge of the world and left me there. Of course, that's not what they said. To me, it was just another car ride winding down a long, cracked road that seemed to lead nowhere. I remember pressing my face to the window, watching the trees grow denser, darker, like the forest itself was swallowing us whole. My mother's voice broke the silence, tight, rehearsed. "We just need a little time to work things out, Emma. You'll stay here for a few days. Be good for us? Okay." She didn't look at me when she spoke. Neither did my father. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Something was wrong, but I was too young to know what. Too young to understand that some goodbyes come dressed as see-you-laters. They left me in a small, weathered house that sat alone on the edge of the woods, its paint peeling like old skin. The woman who answered the door was a stranger, a distant cousin, maybe, or an old friend. I can't remember her name because it didn't matter. She was just a body, a placeholder. "We'll be back soon," my mother whispered, her hand cold against my cheek. I held on to that touch like it was a promise. I watched their car disappear down that long road, the engine's hum fading into nothing. Then it was quiet, too quiet. The first day, I waited by the window. Every sound, every snap of a branch, every distant rumble of an engine made my heart leap. I ran to the door each time, convinced they had come back for me. But each time, the road was empty, stretching into the distance like an open wound. That night, I curled up in the corner of a small bed, hugging my knees to my chest. I whispered their names into the dark. "Mom, Dad, please come back." But the shadows only whispered back. The second day was colder. The woman, they called her Mrs. Harper, I think, gave me toast for breakfast, but my stomach was knotted with fear. I couldn't eat. I sat by the window again, fingers tracing patterns on the fog glass, watching the trees sway in the wind. By afternoon, I started to wonder if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too loud, too messy. Maybe I hadn't said, "I love you" enough. Kids think that way when the people who are supposed to love them disappear without explanation. Every minute stretched into an hour. Every hour felt like a lifetime. By the third day, hope was slipping away, replaced by something heavier, something sharp and cold. I had not slept. My clothes clung to me, damp with sweat and tears. I felt feverish. My throat was sore from calling out for parents who were never going to answer. The sky outside was gray, and the woods beyond the house seemed to creep closer, like they were reaching for me. I remember staring at those trees, feeling like if I stepped into them, I might vanish completely, just like my parents had. Maybe that was what they wanted. That night, the fever took hold. My body burned, but I shivered beneath the thin blanket. I drifted in and out of a restless sleep, caught in that place between dreams and reality. I heard voices, some real, some imagined. I heard my mother's laugh, but it twisted into something cruel. I heard my father's footsteps, but they faded into the wind. Then, through the haze, I heard something else. A knock, soft at first, then more insistent. A shape appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the stormy night. I thought it was a dream until I felt her hand on my forehead. "Emma," she said. Her voice was warm, steady, but laced with worry. "Oh, my poor girl." I tried to focus through the fever. Her face came into view, lined with age but gentle, eyes that seemed to know everything. She was familiar and unfamiliar all at once. My parents had told me she was gone, lost to time, they said, like she had faded into the past. But she was here, standing before me, as real as the pain in my chest. "Grandma Alice?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes softening. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here now." I don't remember much of what happened next. I remember being lifted into her arms, wrapped in a thick coat that smelled like pine and rain. I remember the sound of her boots against the gravel as she carried me outside. The cold air bit at my face, but her warmth surrounded me. I pressed my face in her shoulder as we left that house behind. Left behind the waiting, the fear, the empty window. Her home was nothing like the place my parents had abandoned me. It was old, ancient almost, with stone walls covered in ivy and windows that glowed with golden light. It sat deep in the woods, hidden from the rest of the world, like a secret only she knew. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of herbs filled the air. It was the first place that felt safe. Alice nursed me back to health with a patience I had never known. She brewed teas from leaves she gathered herself, whispered stories as she pressed cool cloths to my burning forehead. I woke up days later, weak but alive, and she was there, always there. She never asked about my parents. She didn't need to. She already knew. And somehow, I knew she had come for me because they never would. Over time, I asked her why she had been gone, why my parents told me she was lost. She never gave me a straight answer. She would smile sadly, brush a strand of hair from my face, and say, "Sometimes people choose greed over love. But I chose you." I didn't understand what she meant then. I only knew that she had saved me, that she had stayed when others left. And in the years that followed, as the forest became my playground and her house became my home, I stopped asking when my parents would come back. I stopped waiting by the window because I had found something better, someone who chose me, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being a child waiting for love and became a girl who had found it. In the quiet strength of a woman who had been cast aside, just like me. And though I didn't know it then, the day she carried me out of that cold house was the day she gave me more than shelter. She gave me a future, but like all things built on love, that future would soon be threatened. Because the people who left me once would come back. Not for me, but for what they thought I had. And when they did, I would finally understand what Alice had meant. Sometimes, people choose greed over love. But not me. I would choose love every time. The fever had broken by the time I fully awoke in Grandma Alice's home. I remember lying under a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and pine, the light from the fireplace dancing along the stone walls. My body was weak, but for the first time in days, or maybe weeks, I felt safe. Alice was there, sitting in an old wooden chair beside me, sipping tea from a chipped mug. She didn't say anything at first. She just smiled when our eyes met, and that smile held something I hadn't seen in a long time: warmth. Real, unconditional warmth. That was my first memory of what would become my new life. A life under the gentle but resilient hand of a woman who had been cast aside, much like me. Alice was unlike anyone I had ever known. There was an air of mystery around her, something wild and untamed, like the forest she lived in. But beneath that rugged exterior was a heart so full of love that, over time, it mended the cracks my parents had left in me. Her home was nestled deep in the woods, far from the town I had once known. It was old, but not decaying, full of life in the way nature itself is. Vines curled around the stone walls, wildflowers bloomed freely along the windows, and the scent of herbs always lingered in the air. Alice cultivated everything herself. Her garden was her pride, a lush, vibrant haven where she grew plants I couldn't even name. Lavender, rosemary, mint, but also rare herbs that she would later teach me had healing properties. She knew every root, every leaf, every petal. But it wasn't just plants. Animals seemed to trust her too. Foxes would skirt around the garden's edge. Birds would perch on her windowsill without fear. Once, I saw a wounded deer limping toward our front door, and Alice tended to it like an old friend. It was as though she was part of the forest itself, woven into it in a way that made her both its protector and its child. In those early months, I followed her everywhere. I was still fragile, clinging to her like she was my anchor. She never pushed me away. Instead, she let me be close, but she also began teaching me, little by little, how to stand on my own. She taught me how to identify plants, how to tell which berries were safe and which were poison. She showed me how to listen to the forest, to understand its sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig that could mean danger or simply the passing of a rabbit. I learned how to build a fire, how to find clean water, and how to stitch up a wound with nothing but a needle and thread. But survival was only part of it. Alice taught me about kindness, true kindness. Not the kind that expects something in return, but the kind that gives simply because it can. We would gather herbs together, but she would always set some aside to leave at the doorstep of an elderly man who lived deeper in the woods. He lost his wife, she told me one day, her eyes soft. Sometimes what people need most isn't medicine for their body. It's knowing someone still cares. Those words stayed with me. Alice never spoke of my parents unless I asked, and even then, her answers were gentle, but firm. Some people, she said once as we knelt in the garden, our hands in the dirt, are given the gift of being parents, but they never learn how to love. That is their loss, Emma, not yours. I wanted to believe her, but it took time. I still had nights when I woke up expecting to see my mother's face, or days when I caught myself glancing down the road, hoping to hear my father's voice. But those moments became fewer, and when they did come, Alice was there. Her presence was enough. Over time, the wound my parents had left in me scarred over. Not gone, but no longer bleeding. The years passed, and I grew into someone I never imagined I could be. I became strong, not just physically, but emotionally. Alice had given me resilience. I could climb trees like a squirrel, navigate the woods in the dark, and handle a knife with precision. But more importantly, I had a heart that knew the value of gentleness. Alice had shown me that strength was not cruelty. It was knowing when to fight, but also when to heal. I became, in many ways, a child of the forest. My hair was always tangled from the wind, my clothes stained with mud and grass. But I was happy. I was free, and I knew love. Not the fleeting, conditional kind my parents had offered, but a love rooted in choice and sacrifice. Alice celebrated my small victories like they were grand achievements. When I successfully brewed my first healing tea, she clapped her hands with joy. When I built a shelter from branches during a rainstorm, she called me her warrior girl. Every day with her was a lesson, but it was also a celebration of life. Our life. There was one evening I will never forget. I was 13, and we had spent the day gathering herbs. As the sun set, painting the sky orange and purple, we sat by the fire outside her home. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You are everything they are not," she said softly. "You are brave. You are kind. You know what it means to stay." I didn't need to ask who she meant. We both knew. I often wonder, looking back, what might have become of me if Alice hadn't found me that night when I was 9? If she hadn't saved me, would I have spent my life chasing after parents who had already decided I wasn't worth keeping? Would I have grown up believing that love was something you had to earn? That you had to be perfect to deserve it? Alice taught me the truth. Love is not something you earn. It is something given freely. And the people who truly love you, they stay. I know many of you listening right now may understand what I felt back then. Maybe you too have looked out a window, waiting for someone who never came back. Maybe you've wondered if you were the reason they left. But I need you to know what Alice taught me. It was never your fault. People leave because of who they are, not because of who you are. Alice was not my mother by blood, but she was my family. She was the one who stayed. And now, I want to hear from you. If you believe Alice was an extraordinary woman, someone who represents the kind of love we all deserve, comment 111 below. And if you agree that my parents were wrong, that no child should ever be made to feel like they are not enough. Comment 222. Your voices matter. Your stories matter. Because together, we can remind each other. Family is not about blood. It's about those who choose to stay. I thought that life with Alice would last forever, but nothing ever does. And when the day came that I lost her, the woman who had been my home, it felt like the forest itself had gone silent. But Alice had taught me one final lesson. Even when the people we love are gone, their love stays. It becomes part of us. And sometimes that love gives us the strength to face what comes next. Because what came next was them, the ones who had left me behind. And this time, they weren't coming back for love. They were coming back for what they thought was theirs. But I wasn't that little girl waiting by the window anymore. I was Alice's girl, and I was ready. I was 18 the day my world shifted beneath me again. It was the day I lost Alice, the woman who had saved me, raised me, and given me the strength to become the person I was. But it was also the day I discovered the truth about who she really was. And it was the day the ghosts of my past, the people I had long stopped calling my parents, came back to reclaim what they thought was theirs. It started like any other day. The forest was still blanketed in early autumn mist, the leaves beginning to blush into shades of red and gold. I woke to the smell of rosemary and bread, the familiar scent of Alice moving through our kitchen. She had been excited about my birthday. 18. She said it was a milestone, an age where the world opened itself up to you, and you could finally stand tall on your own. We had plans, nothing grand. Alice had never been one for extravagance, despite the quiet elegance she carried in everything she did. We were going to spend the day walking through the woods, collecting herbs, and end the evening with a homemade stew and my favorite blackberry pie. Simple, perfect, because with Alice, every ordinary day felt like home. But that day never came. I found her in the garden, her body slumped beside the lavender bushes she loved so much. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, like she had simply lain down to rest. But she was gone. A stroke, the doctor said later. Quick, painless. But for me, the pain was anything but quick. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. My chest ached with a grief so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. But the strange thing was I did not break. I wanted to collapse into the earth beside her and let it take me too. But Alice had spent 9 years preparing me for this moment, though neither of us had known it. She had taught me that loss was a part of life. That love didn't disappear when someone died. It stayed. It became the air around you, the strength inside you. So I did what Alice had taught me. I survived. The house was too quiet in the days after her death. Her absence was everywhere. In the empty chair by the fire, the untouched cup of tea still sitting on the windowsill. But I kept moving. I tended the garden. I fed the animals. I stayed in motion because stopping meant facing the reality that she was never coming back. It was while sorting through her things that I found the truth. I had always thought Alice was simply a woman of the forest, a kind soul who had chosen a quiet, humble life. But tucked away in her desk drawer, beneath old photographs and handwritten letters, I found documents, bank statements, property deeds, business contracts, and a name that made my breath catch in my throat. Alice Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. Alice was not just a woman who grew herbs in her garden. She was the founder and owner of one of the most successful herbal medicine and pharmaceutical companies in the state. Her modest life had been a choice, one she had made to protect me and perhaps to find her own peace. I sat there for hours, staring at the papers that confirmed what felt impossible. Alice had built an empire worth over $50 million, and in her will, carefully tucked inside a sealed envelope, she had left it all to me. $50 million. The number didn't feel real. It was just ink on paper. But what it represented was very real. Security, power, freedom, and responsibility. The kind Alice had always believed I was strong enough to carry. But with that inheritance came something else. Something I should have seen coming. Them. I was at the kitchen table when they arrived. I recognized the sound of their car before I saw their faces. 10 years had passed, but I had not forgotten the low rumble of that old sedan. The same car that had driven me to the edge of the woods and left me there. My heart raced as I stood up. I wanted to hide. I wanted to lock the door and pretend I wasn't home. But Alice's voice echoed in my mind. Stand tall, Emma. You are stronger than you know. So I stood my ground. The knock was sharp and patient. When I opened the door, there they were, my mother and father. Time had worn them down. My mother's hair was streaked with gray, her face etched with lines of bitterness. My father had grown heavier, his eyes sunken with something I couldn't quite place. Desperation, perhaps. But their voices were the same. Emma, my mother said, her tone sweet but strained. We heard about Alice. We came as soon as we could, as if they had ever cared. We know this must be hard for you, my father added. But we're here now. You don't have to be alone anymore. I stared at them, trying to reconcile these people with the ones who had abandoned me. Their faces feigned concern, but their eyes betrayed them. They flicked over my shoulder, scanning the house that was now mine. They knew. Somehow they knew. We're family. My mother continued, stepping closer. You should come home with us. Family. That word felt like a curse. I wanted to scream at them, to demand where they had been for the last decade. I wanted to show them the nights I had cried myself to sleep, the wounds Alice had mended, both the visible and the invisible. But I didn't. I was Alice's girl now, and Alice had taught me that true strength was not always loud. I am home, I said quietly. This is my home. Their smiles faltered, but my mother quickly recovered. Emma, let's not be difficult, she said, her voice slipping into that sharp tone I remembered from childhood. You belong with us. You're still our daughter. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. They had not been my parents in a long time. Then came the final blow. My father's voice lowered, his eyes narrowing just slightly. We know about the inheritance. There it was. The mask slipped, and their true reason for being here stood bare before me. $50 million had called them back. Money, not love. They had smelled it like blood in the water, and now they were here to feed. I gripped the edge of the door frame to steady myself. You abandoned me, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. Alice raised me. She is my family. My mother stepped closer, her voice lowering into something cold and calculated. You are legally our daughter. You're not 18 yet. We still have rights. I could feel the walls closing in, but before I could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. That won't be necessary. We turned to see a man in a suit, polished, professional, stepping out from his car. He held a briefcase, and his gaze was steady. I'm Richard Lawson, Alice Whitmore's attorney, he said, his voice firm. Emma is the sole beneficiary of Alice's estate, and she has been legally emancipated as per Alice's wishes. My parents froze. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father's face twisted with frustration. The lawyer turned to me, his eyes kind but serious. Miss Whitmore, shall we discuss the next steps? I nodded, and without another word, I stepped back into the house. My parents stood there, stunned, as the door closed between us. But I knew this wasn't over. People like them didn't walk away from $50 million. They would be back. I looked around the house, my house now, and felt Alice's presence everywhere. Her love was woven into the walls, into the garden outside, into every lesson she had taught me. I was no longer that little girl left behind in the woods. I was Alice's girl, and I was ready. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that money can reveal a person's true nature? Comment 111 if you agree, or share your thoughts below. Would you have let them back into your life? Would you have forgiven them? Let me know. The day I sat across from Richard Lawson, Alice's attorney, in his sleek, minimalist office downtown, was the day I realized that inheriting a fortune was nothing like I had imagined. There were no feelings of triumph, no weightless sense of freedom. Instead, there was pressure, a heavy, suffocating kind that curled around my chest and reminded me of all I had lost. Alice was gone. The woman who had plucked me from the depths of abandonment, who had stitched my shattered heart back together, was now only a memory. And in her place, there was this: papers, legal terms, and a bank account filled with more zeros than I could comprehend. But there was more. Of course, there was more. Alice had never been the kind of woman to hand over something without a purpose. Her life had been built on intention. Every act of kindness, every business decision, every lesson she had ever taught me. This was no different. Lawson leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Alice wanted you to understand that wealth, in itself, is meaningless. What we do with it, that is what defines us. He slid a document across the polished mahogany table. The inheritance, everything, will be yours, but under one condition. I held my breath. You must complete the project Alice started. The Green Door Center. I blinked. The what? Lawson's expression softened. Alice began developing a rehabilitation and support center for abandoned and at-risk children. Children like you once were. She called it the Green Door. It was her dream, but she didn't have time to finish it. She wanted you to be the one to see it through. If you complete the center and ensure its proper functioning, the estate will be fully yours. Until then, the assets are held in trust. You will receive a stipend for living expenses and to fund the project, but full control only comes when the Green Door opens. I stared at him, my heart twisting. Of course, this was Alice's legacy. Of course, she had left me more than money. She had left me a mission. Because Alice knew me better than anyone. She knew I needed more than wealth. I needed purpose. For a brief moment, I felt her presence. The warmth of her hand guiding mine through the forest. Her voice teaching me to listen to the wind. Her laughter ringing out as I brewed my first tea without burning it. She was still with me, and she always would be. But reality crashed back the moment I stepped outside the law office. They were waiting. My parents. I hadn't heard from them in the weeks since Lawson shut them down with the legal emancipation notice. But I knew they wouldn't stay away for long. People like them never did. My mother's face lit up with a carefully rehearsed smile when she saw me. My father played his role, too, calm, apologetic, every inch the concerned parent who just wanted to reconnect. We just want to talk, my mother said, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. We miss you, Emma. We're family. Family. That word again. That weapon. I folded my arms, my voice colder than I intended. I'm not interested. My father stepped forward, his mask slipping slightly. We know about the conditions. About the Green Door. Of course they knew. They must have dug into every crevice of Alice's life the moment she died. I could almost see their desperation. It clung to them like the scent of something rotting. We can help you, my mother urged. You're just a girl. You can't possibly manage something like this on your own. Alice was using you. She was keeping you under her thumb. That wasn't love, Emma. It was control. I felt the old anger bubble up. The little girl inside me who had waited by the window, who had cried into the night for parents who never came. But I had outgrown her. Alice had made sure of that. She saved me, I said quietly. You left me. She stayed. My mother's eyes hardened. The pretense began to crack. You need us. You're going to fail. And when you do, you'll come crawling back. My father's voice was sharper. Do you think you're better than us now? Because you have money? That's our money, Emma. Alice manipulated you. She poisoned you against us. We're your parents. The word hit me like a slap. Parents. But what did that mean? Was it blood? Was it biology? Or was it the person who sat by your bedside when you were sick? Who taught you how to survive? Who held you when you were broken? Alice had answered that question for me long ago. Some people are given the gift of being parents, but they never learn how to love. That is their loss, not yours. So I stood tall, just as she had taught me. I don't need you, I said, my voice steady. I never did, and I will finish the Green Door. Not for the money. For Alice. For the kids who need someone to stay. Their faces twisted with anger and disbelief, but I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away. But that wasn't the end. It never is. The campaign started soon after. Lies. Whispers. Stories planted online. Anonymous posts accusing Alice of exploiting me, of using me as a pawn. Rumors that I was unstable, that I was too young to handle such a large inheritance, that my parents had been cut out unjustly. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Whispers followed me into town. Reporters hovered like vultures, hoping to provoke a response. And my parents? They made their rounds. appearing on local television with teary eyes and trembling voices, painting themselves as victims of a cruel old woman and an ungrateful daughter. "We just want our little girl back," my mother sobbed on one broadcast. Is that so wrong? I watched that interview alone, clutching Alice's old shawl. My anger was hot, but my grief was hotter. This was what they did. They twisted love into leverage. But they underestimated me. I poured everything into the green door. It became my anchor, my shield. I met with architects, counselors, child welfare experts. I visited shelters and listened to the stories of kids who had been left behind, just like I had. And slowly, the vision came to life. The center wasn't just a building. It was a promise, a place where no child would wait by a window, wondering if they were worth coming back for. I felt Alice with me every step of the way. Her voice in the rustling leaves, her warmth in the sun on my face. The day the green door finally opened, I stood before the staff and the first group of children, wide-eyed and nervous, but filled with hope. And I saw myself in them. I realized then that Alice's final lesson had come full circle. She had given me wealth, yes, but more importantly, she had given me the chance to turn my pain into purpose. So, I ask you, those of you listening now, do you believe that true family is the one who chooses to stay, not the one who shares your blood? Comment 111 if you agree. Or share your own story. Because I know this. Blood can betray you. But love, the kind Alice gave me, that is the rarest inheritance of all. The smear campaign against me began slowly, like a thin crack spreading across glass, until one day, it shattered everything. At first, it was whispers, little murmurs in town whenever I passed through to gather supplies for the green door. Women pausing mid-conversation when they noticed me, their smiles tightening into something far less friendly. A cashier who had always greeted me with warmth suddenly seemed hesitant, her eyes flicking toward the register as though I might snatch the bills from her drawer. Then the posts appeared. Social media, that double-edged sword. I remember the first one, a blurry photo of me standing outside Alice's house, captioned, "Rich girl turns back on her real family, leaves elderly parents in poverty." It was absurd, laughable, even if it hadn't hit so close to home. The comments were worse. Strangers condemning me, calling me ungrateful, selfish. People who had never met Alice accused her of brainwashing me, exploiting me for her wealth. My parents were painted as victims, heartbroken, penniless, desperate to reconnect with their wayward daughter. "We raised her," my mother wrote in one particularly viral post. "We sacrificed everything for her. And now, she acts as though we don't exist." She stole Alice's fortune and left us to suffer. The likes poured in, the sympathy, the outrage. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth into every comment section. But Alice had taught me better than that. Let the truth speak through your actions. She had said once when I was 14, after a neighbor accused me of trespassing because I had helped mend their broken fence. People will see in time who you are, but time moves slowly when the world is against you. The real blow came when they arrived at the green door. I was in the middle of reviewing staff schedules when one of our counselors rushed into my office, face flushed with panic. "Emma, you need to come outside. Now!" I stepped out into the courtyard, and there they were, my mother with tears streaming down her face, clutching a framed photo of me as a child. Me, before they left me behind. My father stood beside her, his face twisted into grief for the cameras. And there were cameras, reporters, phones held high, recording every moment. "We just want to see our daughter," my mother sobbed, loud enough for the microphones to catch every word. "We want to know she's safe." A crowd had gathered, some of them parents of the children we had taken in, others just curious onlookers. They muttered among themselves, unsure. Doubt crept into their faces. I froze. This was it. This was their final attack. They weren't here for me. They were here to dismantle what I had built. The green door was more than just a project. It was Alice's legacy, my legacy. It was the home I had needed when I was 9, sitting by a window, waiting for parents who would never return. And now, those same people stood here, trying to tear it all down. I felt my chest tighten, my throat closing, Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. Then I saw her, Alice. Not really, of course, but in my memory, she was there, standing by the herb garden, her hands brushing through the lavender. Her eyes steady, her voice calm. "You survived worse, Emma. You survived the storm. Nothing can break you now." I took a breath, and then another. I stepped forward, past the reporters, past the cameras, until I was face to face with the two people who had given me life and then abandoned me. "You need to leave," I said, my voice firm but measured. My mother's tears faltered, just slightly. My father's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the reaction they wanted. They had expected me to break. "Emma, please." My mother tried again, softer now, as if we were the only ones there. "We love you. We just want to fix this." I looked at her. The woman who had driven me into the forest and left me there. The woman who now clutched a photo of that same little girl as if she had ever cared. "You love the money," I said. "You love what Alice built. But you don't love me." There was a collective gasp from the crowd, the reporters leaning in closer. My father stepped forward, voice low but threatening. "You think this is over? You think we'll just walk away?" I met his gaze. "Yes, because you have no power here. Not anymore." I turned to the crowd, the staff, the parents, the children watching from the windows. "This place is for kids like me, kids who were left behind, kids who deserve better. That's what Alice wanted. That's what I'm going to do. Nothing will stop that. Not lies, not threats." For a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, a few people started clapping. One by one, others joined in, parents, counselors, even a few reporters. My parents stood there stunned. The performance had failed. The curtain had fallen. "You'll regret this," my father spat under his breath before they turned and walked away. But I wouldn't. I knew that now. That night, I sat alone in Alice's old room, holding the letter she had left for me, the one I had read after her funeral, but now felt compelled to read again. Her handwriting was steady, graceful as always. "Emma, don't be afraid. You survived the greatest storm of your life when you were just a child. Nothing can break you now. The world will test you, but you are stronger than you know. Remember, the ones who love you are not always the ones who gave you life. You are my family, and you are ready. With all my love, Alice." Tears blurred the ink, but I didn't wipe them away. They were part of this story now, part of the strength Alice had given me. I ask you now, those of you listening to my story, do you believe that we are more than our bloodlines? That real family is the one who stands by you, not the one who abandons you? Comment 111 if you agree, or share your thoughts. Tell me what family means to you. Because for me, family was Alice. And because of her, I stood. Because of her, the green door stayed open. Because of her, I would never be afraid again. In the days following my parents' public humiliation at the green door, a strange kind of quiet settled over my life. For the first time since Alice's death, I felt like I could breathe. Their departure hadn't erased the damage they'd done, but it had drawn a line in the sand, one they could no longer cross. They had tried everything: manipulation, lies, and public spectacle. But they had failed. The truth, as Alice always said, had a way of cutting through the noise. But the damage they had inflicted, the doubts they had sown, still lingered in the minds of some. I could feel it when I walked into town, see it in the guarded stares from people who weren't sure what to believe. And I realized that silence was no longer an option. My parents had weaponized their story, but I had a story too, a true one, and it was time the world heard it. The decision to hold the press conference wasn't easy. I had always preferred the quiet, Alice's kind of quiet, the kind that let you hear the wind through the trees and the soft rustle of lavender in the garden. But this was bigger than me now. It was about the green door, about Alice's legacy, and about every child who had ever sat by a window wondering if anyone was coming back for them. The room was small, but the cameras made it feel crowded. Journalists, bloggers, and even a few national outlets had shown up, drawn by the controversy my parents had stirred. They expected scandal. They wanted drama, but I was there to give them something else, something real. I stood at the podium, the microphone adjusting slightly under my trembling hand. I wasn't afraid of speaking. I was afraid of opening the door to a past I had worked so hard to survive. But as I looked at the faces before me, I remembered Alice's words. The truth will speak through your actions. I took a breath. My name is Emma Whitmore. I began, using Alice's surname with pride. Some of you know me as the granddaughter of Alice Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. Others know me as the girl caught in a family dispute over an inheritance. Today, I want to tell you who I really am. I told them everything. I painted the picture of that 9-year-old girl sitting by the window, waiting for parents who would never return. I described the cold nights, the fear, the questions that haunted me. Why wasn't I good enough? What did I do wrong? I spoke about Alice finding me, lifting me out of that darkness, and teaching me what family truly meant. I told them how she had raised me, not out of obligation, but out of love. I paused, feeling the weight of the room shift. Journalists who had come seeking scandal now scribbled with a different kind of urgency. I saw sympathy in their eyes, understanding. Maybe some of them had waited by their own windows once. My parents, I continued, my voice steady, left me because I was not their priority. Money was. And when Alice passed, they didn't come back out of love. They came back because they thought there was something to take. There were murmurs, but I pressed on. What they didn't understand, what they will never understand, is that Alice's greatest gift wasn't her money. It was this. I gestured to the banner behind me, green and gold, with the name The Green Door Center emblazoned across it. This is her legacy, a place for children like me, children who were abandoned, neglected, or simply forgotten. A place where no child will sit by a window wondering if anyone cares, because here someone always will. I described the center's mission, how we would offer shelter, counseling, education, and, most importantly, unwavering support. I spoke of the partnerships we had formed with schools, social workers, and mental health professionals. I told them about the children who had already arrived, scared at first, but slowly finding safety within our walls. I ended with Alice. She believed that real wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch. She saved me, and through this center, her love will continue to save others. When I stepped back from the podium, there was silence, just for a moment. Then applause. Real, genuine applause. Not the kind reserved for scandal or gossip. This was something different. It was respect. The headlines that followed were not what my parents had hoped for. From abandoned child to guardian of hope, Emma Whitmore honors grandmother's legacy with Center for Forgotten Children. The story was no longer about money. It was about resilience, about choosing love over greed, about finding family not in blood, but in those who stay. Of course, my parents reacted. They went on another round of interviews, this time angrier, more desperate. They accused me of lying, of rewriting history to suit my narrative. But the public mood had shifted. People could see the truth in my eyes, and perhaps they saw a piece of themselves in my story. The green door flourished. Families in need began reaching out, asking how they could bring their children or how they could help. Donations poured in, many from people who had been touched by Alice's kindness years before. It seemed she had left her mark on more lives than I had ever realized. Each child who walked through our doors carried their own storm. I saw it in their eyes, the same storm that had once lived in mine. But I also saw something else, the flicker of hope, the fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, this place could be different. I was there when we tucked the first little girl into bed, her tiny fingers clutching a stuffed bear donated by a local church. She asked if someone would be there in the morning. When we said yes, she smiled, a small, tentative smile. But it was a start. Alice would have loved that. Her photograph hangs in the main hallway now, smiling, vibrant, surrounded by the green and gold colors she adored. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "For Alice, who chose to stay." I still think about my parents sometimes. I wonder if they ever pause in their anger long enough to feel regret. I wonder if they ever look back and realize what they lost. Not the money, but me. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. It doesn't matter, because I know who I am. I am Alice's granddaughter. I am the girl who survived the storm, and I am the woman who holds the door open for those who come after me. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that what we give to others defines our true legacy? Comment 111 if you agree, or share your thoughts. What do you think makes a life truly meaningful? Because for me, it's this: the green door is open, and it will never close. As I stand here today, looking back on everything, the abandonment, the pain, the battles, and ultimately the healing, I realize that this story was never truly about money. It was never about winning or inheriting a fortune. It was about finding what family truly means. It was about learning that sometimes the people who bring us into this world are not the ones who stay by our side. And that's okay, because real family is built on love, not blood. It's the people who hold your hand when you're afraid, who lift you up when you fall, who stay, even when it's hard. I chose love over greed. I chose to honor Alice, not just with words, but with action. The green door stands as proof of that choice. It's a home for children like me, children who thought they were alone, who thought no one was coming back for them. But now, when they look out the window, they won't see emptiness. They'll see hope. They'll see that someone is here, someone who will stay. I know that many of you watching may have your own storms, your own wounds that haven't quite healed. Maybe you've been left behind too. Maybe you've questioned your worth, just like I did. If that's you, I want you to know this: you are not alone. You are worthy of love, and you are stronger than you think. I would love to hear your story. If you've ever felt abandoned or struggled to find your place, please share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters. You never know who might find strength in your words. Comment 111 if you believe that love, not blood, is what truly makes a family. Or share your thoughts. Let's create a community where no one feels alone. And if my story has touched you, if you believe that love can change everything, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to AGS Stories. Your support means the world to me. Together, we can open doors for those still waiting by their windows. I am Emma, and I chose to open my door, not for money, but for the children still searching for their home.